Welcome to our new program, Economic Talks in CIVILNET. I am Alexander Grigorian, Associate Professor at the American University of Armenia. In our talks, we invite representatives from international organizations, think tanks, government agencies and private sector to discuss Armenian topics as well as topics relevant for the region. Today we host Manuk Hergnyan, Managing Partner at EV Consulting and Granatus Ventures, and we will discuss the Armenian economy from the competitiveness perspective. Hi Manuk.
Hello.
I'm happy to invite you, and I will just start from the first question. Do you think that after Velvet Revolution, Armenia experiences institutional changes, meaning that we have substantial improvement in the rule of law, access to opportunities and more secure property rights?
First of all, thank you for the invitation. I think the radical changes that happened after the Velvet Revolutions had their profound impact on the institution and business environment in Armenia. First of all, one of the major constraints of Armenia's economy was that the businesses and the society at large didn't perceive that business opportunities were equal for everyone, and the level playing field was not there. And a few privileged groups had access to more preferable conditions of doing business, specific resources, administrative resources. And I think in that regard, there's been a very important improvements. However, we have to note that it is a very long-term game. So a lot yet to be done, and some changes will need much more time and much more complex policies in place rather than just a few legislative changes or practices in tax or customs administration.
Okay, when we think about improvement of institutions, then we always have in our mind these three dimensions: rule of law, access to opportunities, and secure property rights. So, and you say that it takes some time, right? On the other hand, what we observe from the Global Competitiveness report, we would expect to have at least some substantial change in terms of the score, in terms of the improvement at all these dimensions that the report covers. So, what is your impression? What could we? So let's go ahead. So, what do you think that we could improve more than what we have?
I think the Global Competitiveness report basically provides this score for the economies to measure their level of competitiveness, and the competitiveness is quite a complex phenomena, and that comes to show that only improving one aspect of the economy is not enough to have a radical shift in economic performance. The score is based on more than 100 indicators, spanning from institutions to healthcare, primary education, until business practices and innovation activities in the economy. So it's quite a comprehensive indicator, and it shows the ability of the economy to grow in the midterm perspective. And basically with the underlying factor being the productivity of the economy. And it's shows also some sort of inertia that the economy has, first of all. And second, that only just one aspect is not enough. It's much more complex. It takes much more comprehensive approach to make a radical improvement. If you look at the dynamics of the score of Armenia, you would see that we have recorded much bigger improvement back in 2017 than actually in 2000 kind of in the pre-revolution year than post-revolution year of 2019. And that shows that, again, it's very complex phenomena. And for example, the improvement in credit to economy, that's been one of the major driving forces. Improvement in innovation activities, in more sophisticated business practices. These are all driving the improvement back in 2017, and plus also these scores also reflected the trend on improvement on some institutional aspects, including the business environment. So we can state that the improvement started actually much earlier, although the 2018 events brought too much kind of radical shifts, and the perspective of translating those improvements into a real economic growth would depend on much more larger set of factors rather than just only a few improvements in business environment, security and property rights, although these are very critical elements.
So since 2018, after the Velvet Revolution, the major expectation from the society perspective is that we will have improvement in the area of corruption. And this should have been in some or the other way reflected in the scores, also in the ranking in 2019. What do you think about that? I mean, it seems it is not really reflected because we have just 1 point improvement in terms of the rank among 190 or so countries.
Yeah, as I said, this is only one indicator. And just to give you a larger perspective, back in 2014, we did what we call a growth diagnostics and identifying the constraints to economic growth to Armenia. And we identify 4 sets of factors, the so-called binding constraints to economic growth. Think of that as kind of the bottleneck, right, in the economic growth. One of the factors was the lack of level playing field and the discrimination in business practices and the dominance of business groups. So that this one set of factors actually I think have been improved significantly. But the next 3 factors take much more I would say a sophisticated effort and a longer term to improve. And I see, for example, one is the quality of the human capital. And you would be surprised how many enterprises would think that the major constraint to their growth is their inability to find the adequately trained professional managers and employees.
Okay.
And that's a very complex problem that goes back to the educational system and the scale of the economy, etc. The third set of factors was the level of the financial diversification of the economy. As you know, financial sector is dominated by the banking sector. And we have very few non-banking institutions, such as private equity funds, or there's been a quite interesting development in the pension sector, but still this non-banking sector is quite less developed, and this is one of the binding constraints for the economic growth. And the fourth one actually is the lack of new economic opportunities. Armenia is specialized in areas where you would see very few opportunities to jump to other more sophisticated economic activities to start export or to expand the economy. And this is a very critical constraint. And in terms of these three factors, there's been very little improvement. And there's been very little effort to improve.
So you are talking after 2018, right? About these three factors, or maybe even going back to?
Even going back to it. And you would see that this is also reflected in the level of the investments. If you see now, the level of the investments in GDP is historically low. So this is kind of a paradox, right?
Both private and public, or you are?
General.
General.
The general gross fixed capital formation, or the general level of the investment in GDP, is fell to almost 15% in the GDP. So historically, we've had on average like 22%. We've had also at some point of time 40%. That was during the construction boom. But in order to grow fast, at least like 7.5%, according to our estimates, you would need closer to at least 25% of investment in GDP. So it's a paradox. After the revolution, Velvet Revolution, you have lower investment activity than before. So this shows that stimulating economic growth takes much more complex set of measures rather than just only in one direction.
Okay. So there is always this discussion or kind of trade-off between scale versus institutions. I mean, I know that many economists, many people think that the small scale of the Armenian economy is the main reason for not having, let's say, outstanding growth and improvement in welfare, while some others think that low quality of institutions is the key reason to have, let's say, weak development for the economy. So what do you think, and what do you think about particularly this trade-off after the revolution? And maybe you can refer also the investments and expectations of investment from that perspective. So scale versus the quality of institutions.
I wouldn't, view it as a trade-off. Basically, you need both. Of course, scale penalizes the opportunity for growth from one side. From the other side, it imposes a more innovative approaches to be able to grow. And on the example of successful small economies, you would see that they could leapfrog from low level of the development to the next level by accepting the best practices from outside and also becoming very outward looking and export oriented, and eventually becoming one of the most sophisticated economies. Look at the Estonia, look at the Ireland, look at the Singapore. So institutional setting is important, but it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. It's like you create a field for football, and then there are no players to play football. You can have the best football playground in the world, but if there are no players,
you can
then
attract, right? You can attract the players. You can say that, look, what the conditions are. So that's maybe the time that we need to bring in. But
Exactly.
then scale comes in. Maybe some of the players will not come because the scale is not big enough to come with some.
Of course, that's
plans.
why if you can't attract with scale, you have to attract with other opportunities and assets. And in our case, I guess in the last national competitive report, we set out kind of our vision for Armenia to be the country for fast learners. Actually, this is becoming an increasingly important decision criteria for many companies to relocate to specific countries in order to access the talent, the human talent, that can earn very fast, because the knowledge is becoming obsolete very quickly, and even the higher education institutions that are providing knowledge now, in a few years, that knowledge becomes obsolete, and the single important trait of human capital is becoming how fast they can learn new knowledge. So if you can achieve this, actually, it could be a really attractive positioning for Armenia in terms of a destination for investments, a destination for doing much more sophisticated businesses.
And you think that having human capital will be sufficient to kind of raise the product without, let's say, physical capital that you need to complement? Or it's kind of maybe exporting a product that we can have within Armenia without human capital? So what is the economic model then?
No, of course, that won't be enough. As I said, the business is very complex. You have to have multiple factors. So, but that's something that you can build your competitive advantage on. And on the example of IT, you could see that's been happening. However, the challenge how you can have the same effect in other areas where you move from low value add activities to much higher value add activities. And here, without much more, I would say, proactive approach in the case of Armenia, given that our constraints, given the small size, from the public sector policy perspective, I can't see that we can achieve that. It's just a very extremist view of libertarian view of the economy, where you just create the environment and then you wait, then the players come in and then do the business. It's not going to happen with Armenia. On top of that, if you add our security challenges, then definitely we need a bit of different approach and a bit much more proactive and much more organized way of conducting economic policy.
And maybe a terminal question, quite kind of logical culmination to our discussion. So what is your opinion about economic revolution? The concept and the content, do you think that we have something close to economic revolution?
I don't see that in the numbers. I don't see some prerequisites in terms of some of the factors that we have discussed. And I don't see the concept of that, how it's going to be achieved.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Manuk. Today we hosted Manuk Hergnyan, managing partner at EV Consulting and Granatos Ventures, and we talked about the Armenian economy from the competitiveness perspective. Thank you one more time.
Thank you.
Goodbye.